Thank you for joining me. I'm pleased this morning to be joined by Gene Guilford, who is the Executive Director of the Independent Connecticut Petroleum Association, and former Republican mayor from the town of South Windsor and independent petroleum dealer, John Mitchum. Having gone to the gas station this past weekend, and once again listening to our constituents, I'm here today to say that there is no direct correlation between the price at the pump and the laws of supply and demand. What's happening all across this country and here in the state of Connecticut is these prices are being artificially driven up by speculators. How do we know this? We know this because of testimony that we've heard from Exxon before the United States Senate, where they increasingly talk about $20 to $30 a barrel being due to speculation. We hear about this because we know also that attempts that are going on in Washington as we speak to derail the Wall Street reform that took place last year, commonly referred to as the Dodd-Frank bill for people in this state. But in that bill to postpone the positions in that bill that would rein in speculation is inane. It makes no sense. And to further cut the CFTC is another example of wrong-headed policy. On those two fronts alone, to delay the restrictions on these speculators, where we already see in progress just a week ago or 2 weeks ago in Oklahoma, the prosecutors finally have brought speculators to court. Now Republicans in Congress are proposing cutting that budget by 30%. That's incredible. This is a time when we need more regulation. This is the time when we have to rein in the speculators. This is the time when people need relief at the gas pump, because in this kind of recessionary economy where we have a fragile recovery, we need to hold on to every single dollar that we can. There are a number of things that can be done, and I'll address those as well, but I want you to hear from Gene Guilford first, from the association, and then John Mitchum, who will anecdotally go through what the problems the people of the state of Connecticut face. Bottom line is this: we cannot delay the implementation of the Wall Street regulation that reins in speculators. And clearly, we have to fund fully the CFTC so that they can go out and prosecute speculators. This is not a time to cut their budget. This is a time to increase their budget and go after these guys. Gene Guilford.
Thank you very much, Congressman. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. You know, we've had an opportunity over the last couple of months, both with Congressman Courtney and Senator Blumenthal, to talk about speculation in these markets, and we're pleased to join Congressman Larson today. You know, the thing that is most important about today is, frankly, what happened last week. I have a statement in the back of the room. I encourage you all to take a copy of it, and appended to it is the statement released on May the 24th by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. Now, the CFTC is this little federal agency of 600 people. It's got a budget of $168 million. It has the statutory authority and responsibility to oversee the $600 trillion commodity market in this country. Last week, they announced their intention to file suit in the Federal District Court of New York against 3 companies and 2 individuals for having manipulated the crude oil market. There is no doubt, although this is an allegation yet to be prosecuted, that these instances, and more like them, starting with Enron, that cost the California electricity market $20 billion, Amaranth in the natural gas market that cost $7 billion, the largest civil penalty ever assessed by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission was against British Petroleum and Propane, when it manipulated the propane market, over $300 million. Marathon Oil, hundreds of millions of dollars. And now, in the midst of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission's legal action against 3 companies who are alleged to have manipulated the crude oil markets and driven up the price for consumers, the response in the month of May, first by the House Agriculture Committee and then by the House Financial Services Committee, is to delay the imposition of the rules to restrain these markets that was designed to go into effect in July of this year. They want to delay them until next year. Next year. And not only that, they want to cut the budget. Imagine that you're in an agency of 300 people and you have $168 million, and House Republicans want to cut $57 million out of its budget and force layoffs. Remember something. From 2007 until 2009, American families lost $19 trillion of wealth. $19 trillion. Our savings, our 401k plans, our pensions and our investments. Americans lost $6 trillion of housing value. And the answer for Republicans, as the agency of the federal government is about to bring down manipulation in the crude oil markets, is wait. Not yet. There is clear and irrefutable evidence in the propane markets, in the electricity markets, in the natural gas markets of manipulation having taken place. And this agency of the federal government should not be restrained from the work that it has a legal responsibility to carry out. Responsibilities that were broadly expanded under the Dodd-Frank legislation that was signed into law by the President last year. The President wants to significantly increase the budget of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. The President wants to significantly increase the number of people working on 52 key rulemakings designed specifically to rein in the speculation in the agriculture markets. And think about how important that is. Wheat, corn, soybeans doubled in the last year. Doubled in the last year. Anybody who goes to the grocery store and buys groceries understands full well how much food prices have increased because of speculation in the agriculture markets. And now, in the energy markets, everyone has seen exactly what the consequences of what we pay in the price for energy. In the 1st of February, the wholesale price of gasoline in New Haven Harbor was $2.55. The middle of this month, it was $3.42. Over the weekend, Goldman Sachs said that we're going to have $135 a barrel crude and $5 a gallon gasoline. This morning, on these markets, because Goldman said jump, people are now voicing how high. We need this agency of the federal government to do the job it was given to do. It needs the people and it needs the resources to carry it out. Because if we don't, then we're going to go back to what happened before the Dodd-Frank law was passed into law. Which is we're going to have higher energy prices, we're going to have speculation driving these markets, not fundamentals. People are going to be paying too much for food and too much for energy, which is where we are today. We're lucky that we have a delegation that gets it. Congressman Larson was in the forefront of this in 2004 when we came to him, John Mitchell and I, asking that we close the Enron loophole. Imagine Enron, it was the largest bankruptcy in the history of America at that time. 20,000 people out of work. Billions in their pension funds gone. California electricity markets built out of $20 billion. And it still took us almost 4 years just to close the Enron loophole. The financial services industry in this country has spent $34 million in the first quarter of this year alone lobbying Congress to stop the implementation of the Dodd-Frank rules. It is shameful that the very entities in the financial services industry who the taxpayers of this country bailed out to keep the financial markets running just 3 years ago are now attempting to stop the very rules that are designed to prevent that very thing from happening again. It's wrong. These rules need to go into effect on time, in July. Their agency needs to be fully funded, and they need to be given the people necessary to go through all of the rulemakings they need to undertake. In just one rulemaking alone, position limits, they have 11,000 comments. 11,000. The 600 people that they have would take years to go through 11,000 comments, just on one rule alone. This is important. It's about what we pay for food, and it's about what we pay for energy. This needs to stay on track, fully funded, and get this finished, because it's important for the future of the country and every single thing we pay for. Thank you very much, John, for your leadership.
Thank you, Gene. You can hear through Gene's testimony, and this is, if I dare say, a rock good Republican himself in terms of his conservative values and where he comes from. What's transpiring in this country is the Gilded Age on steroids in terms of the focus on greed and manipulation that's ongoing, which is why it's so terribly important, especially to the consumers and the everyday American, that there is pushback and that there is regulation and that we're able to achieve this goal by both adopting the regulations, as Gene says, on time, and then fully funding the initiative to make sure that we continue to regulate and go after speculators. With that, let me introduce my good friend and former mayor of South Windsor, John Mitchum.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, John, for your long-standing efforts to return sanity to the trading activity of petroleum. Thank you for being a leading advocate for the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Many years ago, the platform for determining the fair market value of petroleum products was created, and that platform was a New York Merc. Today, years later, I would submit to you that that system is broken, and it has been broken for a number of years. Sophisticated, programmed trading has replaced the dynamics of supply and demand. For example, in May of 2010, the wholesale price of heating oil, as well as gasoline, was $1 a gallon less. The physical inventories of heating oil last September, at the beginning of the heating season, was at a 27-year high. Physical inventories of 27-year highs. And yet, as recent as last month, the product costs more than $1.25 more per gallon. No supply disruption, no shortage, an increase of more than 33%. Surging gas prices are once again weakening this economy. ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson stated in testimony earlier this month that crude oil should cost $60 to $70 a barrel. An analysis of Goldman Sachs in April of this year stated that the unregulated speculation adds over $20 per barrel to the cost of crude oil. Shouldn't that be sounding an alarm clear and loud enough in Washington to take action to protect the consumer? Shouldn't this be a super priority? And yet last week, a vote to delay the consumer's protection under the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was passed along party lines, with Republicans voting for delay. I'm the former Republican mayor of the town of South Windsor. House Republicans proposed cutting the budget of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission by 44% next year. This is at a time when manipulation by 3 companies has surfaced. We must not and we cannot afford further delays. It would be my further fervent hope to engage a tremendous outpouring of support and pressure upon Washington to do that which must be done to curb the speculative fever that exists in this marketplace. The new limits that were supposed to be in place by January 17th have not yet been agreed upon, and here it is, the end of May. The visible signs of the near collapse of the financial markets still exist with foreclosures, bankruptcies, and high unemployment and a struggling housing market. They are still here. High petroleum prices are again taking their toll upon our weak recovery. We have to take action to control speculation. The trading volume and lack of transparency is not something we can continue to ignore. I would like to share with you a real-life story that happened a week ago. On Sunday, as we often do in the early evening, my family, I take them to the First and Last Tavern in Hartford. You know that.
That's a good place, yeah. What an endorsement.
To dine. I asked my wife to call Jennifer, our granddaughter, to join us with her 2 children, Terrence and Janasia. Jennifer's response was, "Grandpa, I haven't got enough gas to get there and back home because I budget just so many dollars for gas. Between driving to work and shuffling her 2 children to sports and other activities, she is limited to the discretionary mileage that she can drive." Needless to say, they were with us that night. But I would say this, I know she is not alone in her anxiety. I know after 54 years in the retail heating oil business, the great number of families that have been financially devastated by the increases in the cost of petroleum again this year. It's just not right. And it's not fun to be the collection agent for a product that is distorted by speculators. We cannot and we must not continue to ignore the unnecessary cost that is being borne as a direct result of speculation in the energy markets. We need a very strong message to be sent to those who voted to delay the implementation of the Dodd-Frank bill. And we need it now. And thank you again, John, for all you've done.
Well, thank you, John and Gene. I think you've heard compelling data and anecdotal evidence in terms of what's going on. Further, we in Congress believe on the Democratic side that we should be adopting use it or lose it, a policy for oil companies sitting on untapped oil fields that will help flood the market, creating, as I have called for, an independent inspector general to oversee the oil industry and other industries within this country, fully funding, as Gene has indicated, the CFTC so it can monitor excessive and abusive speculative practices in all areas of commodities, but in this case in oil. Certainly ending the taxpayer-funded subsidies for big oil would go a long way towards helping us out, and we have called upon the President, if we can't get action from Congress in these areas where we think are necessary, in making sure that we're enforcing the Dodd-Frank Wall Street legislation the way it should, and if we can't make sure that full funding will allow the prosecutorial efforts that are going forward to take place, then we should release the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in an effort to dampen down the speculators. But this is a battle that we are engaged in Congress. It is timely, as Gene points out, as the Financial Services and Ag Committees both are voting to delay and to cut in appropriations the funding that would go towards this very critical regulation. And with that, let me throw it open to questions and invite my 2 colleagues and friends up here to the mic as well.
So, Congressman, what can you do? I mean, I understand what you want to do, but with the majority of Republicans in the House, what are your options?
Well, we have 2 branches of government, and we have the people. And What we hope to do, and I think you heard both Gene and John talk about this, is get the grassroots network going. We also are, I think, are fortunate that a couple of movies are coming out, whether it's the HBO's Too Big to Fail, or I believe the other movie is the Insiders. These are all now getting to the general public, where the people are beginning to become outraged in and of themselves. And at the end of the day, we think it's that kind of outrage. You're right, we only have 193 members in the House of Representatives, but we know that we're going to have 193 of them that'll be fighting to make sure that that the Wall Street reform, commonly referred to as Dodd-Frank, is enacted, not postponed, not delayed, but put into effect, in that we not only restore, but as the President has called for, enhance the ability to rein in speculative practices on Wall Street. Yes, in the back.
Obviously, this issue of oil speculation was discussed back in 2008 when oil prices hit the highest ever nationwide. So what has been done since 2008 to...
Well, the Dodd-Frank legislation was passed, including a provision that both of these gentlemen worked on called the Pump Act, that was sponsored, that I was a co-sponsor of, along with Bart Stupak. That is part of enacting the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform legislation would put that practice into effect. Actually, since Katrina, I think it was, as Gene said, back in 2004, 2005, that we came out with initial legislation, etc. So this has been a battle. And you might say, well, why does it take so long for these things to happen? How much money, Gene, did you say was spent just this?
34 million.
34 million.
The first quarter.
In the first quarter. I think the American public needs to be educated to the fact of how much money is spent in Washington to stop usually consumer-oriented legislation like Dodd-Frank's bill, and that was lobbied against severely. And now, as the regulations and implementation are coming into effect, the lobbying still is going on to postpone, to delay, to put off, and to cut. And as Gene points out, how can a regulatory body with so few people face those extraordinary cuts and then be required, as the industry piles on comment after comment after comment, to deal with this without appropriate enforcement and people? Yes.
If you can't get anything through the House, does this really become a campaign issue in 2012 at the best?
Well, we have two branches of, we have two chambers, and we think that we're going to be successful in the Senate, but we know that in order to be successful, you have to wage the effort in both chambers and take the matter to the people.
So just a campaign issue at you think at the best?
Well, I think the Senate will be successful in trying to push this. The question is whether or not the House will continue to block it. I think, people, the public ultimately will be the judge in any election, and in as much as the House is elected every 2 years, every cycle, every issue is an election issue. But this clearly is one that impacts people's pocketbook, that has impacted the choices that they have to make, and I think it's very clear that there's the reason for it is excessive speculation. So it kind of says, whose side are you on at the end of the day when you're out there facing this issue? A number of the proposals that we're calling for, including my proposal on independent inspector generals throughout our system, we expect that those are the kinds of things that are going to take time and will be battles that will be hard fought. But this is legislation that was already enacted. This is just a matter of implementation and not delaying, and then a matter of standing up and saying, don't cut. So the President's budget calls for an increase that's where it should be, and the pressure ought to be brought to bear. And the best way to do that is to continue to wage those efforts in both chambers of Congress, in the House and the Senate, and also to inform the people.
John, people frequently, when prices go up, talk about drawing down the strategic reserves. Do you have any data as to how much you'd have to draw down to move the market, and how much could you move on price by doing
It's a great question, and I think that's what presents the administration with the quandary. They do not want it. That's a last resort, even though we went down that path before, and President Bush was prepared to go down that path before, because the threat of it in flooding the markets has a way to dampen down the speculators from taking advantage of the system. I don't have the exact data off the top of my head, Mark, but it's always been viewed as a way in which that we can. The object here is to flood a market, but as Gene and John have both pointed out, when supply and demand isn't the issue, I can understand the administration's pushback is saying, is that an answer? That's the last possible thing they want to do. What the president has called for, and we certainly support him in this effort, but that is primarily to bolster the CFTC, increase the prosecutorial efforts against speculators, increase the budgets, and do the oversight and review that's necessary that will and enact and implement Dodd-Frank. It is in part, a large part, due to absolute frustration on the part of members of Congress that they look toward the release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as at least an administrative way that the market can be flooded to drive down price.
Harlan, you asked a great question. And every single time somebody says it's not about politics, you can damn well be sure that it's absolutely about politics. Yes, it is. And in the dynamics of politics, as we've been through in the last 3 years, we know that there are certain facts. And one of the facts is that America has lost $19 trillion in wealth. The response of the federal government to that loss of all of that wealth as a result of the reckless and irresponsible behavior, primarily through the use of derivatives, by Wall Street, was the Dodd-Frank legislation, whose rules have not been allowed to go into effect yet, and who Republicans want to delay even further. And John's right. I was a presidential appointee of Ronald Reagan's in his first administration. I was chief of staff at the general counsel at the Department of Energy. This isn't about Republicans and Democrats, and it's not about liberals and conservatives. It's about this. It's about Goldman Sachs calling over the weekend for $135 a barrel crude and $5 a gallon gasoline this summer. And the markets are already moving up. That, to me, is what this is about. And why these rules should not be delayed. And Mark, I'll tell you that in one very important respect, Title VII of Dodd-Frank, which was the derivatives title, is the key to what we're talking about here. Because it means that the hedge funds, the investment banks, all of the money that comes from Wall Street that has nothing to do with purchasing an investment instrument and then taking the delivery of the product, whether it's a bushel of wheat, a therm of natural gas, a kilowatt hour of electricity, or a barrel of oil. They have no intention of ever taking delivery of it. They're using derivatives for the purpose of taking positions and making money from it. There's nothing illegal about that. But what we wanted to accomplish in Dodd-Frank was something very important, and that is that we wanted to take all of these non-commercial investors, all of the hedge funds and investment banks, yes, like Goldman Sachs, and tell them that they were going to be restricted by percentage of how much they could invest in these markets, because their very investment serves as an inflator of the price of these markets. So if they are not restrained, we could very well see a replication of what happened in 2008. Remember 2008? In March, it went from $70 a barrel to July, it went to $147, and by November, it went to $32. Don't tell me everybody in China decided to take a drive in their car that drove it to $147. There is no issue here with the amount of crude oil that's in the market, refinery runs, the amount of gasoline that's available for distribution. There are no shutdowns of refineries, there are no floods, there is no mayhem. This is all about speculators on Wall Street. And that is exactly what Dodd-Frank was designed to restrain, which is the reason why we say the rules need to go into effect this July, not next year.
How much do you think regulators should go for now? Should go for?
I will tell you that by virtue of 2 or 3 studies that deal with the issue of where crude oil prices should be today, you have approximately 25% of the cost of a barrel of crude as the result of the declining value of the dollar. You've heard me complain regularly since last fall about what I consider to be the ruinous policy of the Federal Reserve to drive down the value of the dollar. Today it's at its lowest level since 2008. Everything priced in dollars goes up in price when the value of the dollar tanks. 25% is that. Another 15 to 20% is just pure speculation. So you're talking about a barrel of crude, $102 right now. It's up $2. Natural gas is up, electricity is up, crude is up all this morning. Shouldn't be 102, should be about 60. If it weren't for the decline in the value of the dollar and the speculation that's added onto it.
But how much do you think a gallon of gas, regular gas, should cost?
If it weren't for this,
Right.
wouldn't be $4, it would be closer to $2.50.
$2.50?
That's correct. That's right. That's right. And to put that in context for you, Harlan, in Connecticut we sell about 4 million gallons a day. That's $6 million a day that the people of Connecticut, and that's just Connecticut, that's $6 million a day the people of Connecticut pay for gasoline higher than they should have to. $6 million a day.
We still have the Republicans in Congress who won't agree to end the subsidies to oil companies, even though oil companies have said, look, we don't need this subsidy. It's certainly made me live in interesting times, and one thing about living in interesting times is when you have Americans who will come forward, as Gene pointed out. This is an issue. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican or Independent, Tea Party, Green Party. This is an issue that strikes at home to everyone who depends on this incredible resource in order to survive, in order to get to work, in order to heat and cool their homes.